These days you can launch a Ubuntu server or a Linux server with just one click. Now there's all kind of or services that you can use, for example vulture.com, DigitalOcean or linode.com, and what you can do there is launch a Ubuntu server with just one click. Now this is not free because they have a computer there that will run your server. For example, if we scroll down here, we can choose our system. So you'll see there are several other Linux systems, some non-Linux systems, and here we have Ubuntu. So let's say we have the latest version. And for this example, I'll just pick the lowest specification. Now, don't need auto backups. You can select some other options. The name of your server. And you can select some other options if you want, like where, the location. So depending on where it should be located, you can select your server. So once ready, you click deploy and it will initialize a new server for you. So this is pretty much the same with DigitalOcean and linode.com, and you'll have an Ubuntu server available on the internet. So all it takes is basically one or a few clicks and you'll have a Ubuntu server ready. Now, of course, once that is started, you will need to configure it. And it will take a moment to install. Let me close these messages here. And once it's installed, you will be able to configure it using a terminal interface. So using a command line or text-based interface. That is very standard with Linux, that you configure everything through the terminal or the command line. So once the installation is complete, you might see the status running, and we can click on it. So we click on our server and you'll see some default information, like some tabs here with overview, usage graphs. So that is the actual usage of the server. You have some settings here. You can take snapshots, automatic backups, depending on the cloud provider. So as I mentioned, all of the operation is done through the terminal. So if you click on the view console here on the top, it will open a little terminal that you can use to configure, and you'll see it's actually still installing. So you'll see it's still unpacking, it's configuring the Linux system. So we need to wait a bit more until this is completed. Even though it said it's completed, it's actually not yet. It's still setting up basic software for this server. Okay, once it's starting, you'll see those green OK messages where it's actually setting up things. So that is the startup process of a Linux system. Now, many desktop Linux systems these days have a graphical screen where it shows some image or some company brand. But for servers, you'll see this kind of messages in the terminal where it says setting up or starting this or that. So once it's started, you'll see on the bottom here, Ubuntu Server login. You might press enter, and this is the authentication phase. So in order to log in, you need a username, password. The default username on any Linux system is root. Root is the system administrator. You'll see here username root, and you have the password here that you might copy. So you can paste that in here. However, this kind of terminal is a bit inconvenient. Like, it's possible to work this way, but it's more easy to connect on your own computer to the server. So open any terminal, and let me enlarge this font here. So a command line interface on your on Windows, that's cmd.x or PowerShell. On Linux you have on Mac you have the terminal, And on Linux you have terminal as well. So if you're a Windows user, just start PowerShell and you'll be able to connect to the server using a tool called SSH. So you type SSH, then username. So in this case the username is root, that is the administrator of the server, and then and then the IP address. So that is the address of your server, the internet address. You'll see here internet address, IP address. Copy that. You'll see those 4 digits there. And we're gonna paste that in. So now we type yes, and it will authenticate. And next thing we need to type is our password. So we can just copy it here. You'll see copy password. Click paste. And you'll see now we are logged in. You can scroll here, the message, you'll see welcome to Ubuntu system. They have some documentation and other stuff. And this is about your actual system. So it's running 122 programs, how much memory it uses, and so on. So now we are inside the system. If I type who am I, which is a Linux command, it tells you your username. In this case, it's root. So Linux servers can be configured through the command line interface. So through commands, so the command line interface, you type a command and you get output. For example, we can type date, press enter, and it tells you the current date. So it works by typing commands. Every command you type will show some output. And now we are connected to the server. If you want to exit or to stop the connection, to end the connection and go back to your system, you can always press exit, and that will exit the computer, and you'll see connection closed. So SSH username at your internet address will connect to the server, and to end the connection just type exit. So let's do some basic commands. With SSH we can connect to our server with our username at the internet address. So you can get that information, the internet address, from your cloud VPS, whether that is Vultr, DigitalOcean, Linode, or some other cloud provider. You can open a connection with SSH, and once you press enter, asks your password, so copy your password. Click paste, and you'll have a connection to your server. Now you're inside your server. You can completely control it through this terminal interface. Now there's all kind of commands you can do. For example, maybe you want to know the current directory. You can do that with the command pwd. You'll see we are inside the /root directory. We can change the directory or change the folder with the cd command. And we can move one directory up, cd ... Now if we check the current directory, pwd, you'll see we are inside the / directory. We can list all the folders or list all the directories with the ls command. So if we type ls, you'll see all the directories here of your server. Now these are all the standard directories on a Linux system. So some of the important ones are etc, where it stores your configuration files, the home directory that has all the user files. You'll have some others like root, that is the files of the administrator. Bin stores a lot of commands. And you'll have the var directory, which has all kind of logs, and also where if you run a website, your website will be stored in the var directory as well. So the var is a very important one for a server. If we enter the var directory, we can list the files and folders using ls. And you'll see we have several directories here. We might enter the log directory, so cd log. List the files and directories with the ls commands. And you'll see all kind of directories in blue and files in white. So based on the color you can differentiate between files are white in this case and folders are blue. And you might output any file with the cat command. So if you type cat with, for example, the file out.log, you'll see the log file out.log contents. So cat will show you the file contents. With any file you can type cat space the file name and it will show you the file contents. So let's do that again. Let's say cat and we output, for example, hash, and you'll see it outputs that file. Now we can scroll up here to see the entire file contents. So this seems to be some startup log or other type of log file. Now to go back to the highest directory, we can type cd/. If you just want to go up one directory, you can type cd ... and you'll see we moved out of the var log directory into the var directory. We can move up one directory more. If we type cd root, we are back in the administrator directory or the root directory. If we type pwd, you'll see we are inside the root directory. Now you can also immediately go to a directory. For example, if we type cd var log and then pwd, we are immediately in the var log directory. Or if we type cd/root pwd, we are immediately in the root directory. So you can do that as well. That's a faster way to go to directories. Configuration files are stored in the etc directory. So if we enter the etc directory or cd/etc, we can list all the files and you'll see all kind of configuration files here. So you'll see a lot of things here. For example, there is the file etc issue. That is the version of the server you're running. So if we output issue cat space issue, you'll see we are running Ubuntu 22, or depending on what you're running, if you type cat issue or cat/etc issue, if you're not in the same directory, it will tell you your version of your system. And there's all kind of configuration here, and sometimes the configuration files end in .conf. You'll see here some files end with .conf, but that's not always the case. Sometimes configuration files or system files, they don't have any .conf. For example, there's the password file which stores user information. That file doesn't have a .conf extension. However, it stores all the user information. So if we output that cat etc password, you'll see all the usernames, and also there's a lot of system users, so that's something to keep in mind. So you'll see here the username followed by the passwords. Now the passwords are stored somewhere else, that's why you see an X. And then you have the user ID and group ID, the file directory of your user, and which shell should be used. And so if the usernames if the ID starts with 1000 or higher, then it's a real user. Otherwise it's just a system user. So you'll see a lot of these have a lower number than 1000. That means those are system users, except root. Root has D0 and it is the system administrator. So in the file etc password, you can always see the users, but when you output it like this, you always see the system users as well. So that's just one of the configuration files. If you type the list command, you can output any type of file, for example sensors3.conf, and you'll see this is another type of configuration file. So the etc directory stores all of your system's configuration files. So now that we have a server, we can install applications on it. One of them could be a web server or HTTP server. Now there are several applications that for that purpose. There is Nginx and Apache. Apache web server is the most widely used web server. So it's an application that runs on your server, and it has many features available. And so before we begin, we should have a non-root user. So now if you type who am I, you'll always see are root, and this is system administrator. What you can do instead is be a regular user and then configure the whole thing as a regular user. So let's first add a user. So you can type add user with your username and then type some passwords. So you might also use the no password or some other type of passwords. And of course you should pick a very strong password. Otherwise, what you'll see is that message that your password is not strong enough. And in the case that your server is public, of course you want to be using a very strong password. So pick a strong password. And you'll see you can configure some more information like full name, phone number, work phone, home phone, and so on. Once that is done, press yes, and the user will be created. However, you will still be the regular user. So if you type who am I, you are not now the new user. What you can do is type exit and log in again with your new username. So instead of root, you'll type Peter or whatever username is at your server IP. Connect, then type your passwords, and you'll now be connected as the regular user. So if I type who am I, you'll see now you are your username, and you'll also be in your current directory. So you'll be in or /home/ your username instead of /root. So you'll have your own folder on the Linux system for your files. So now that we have a user, we can set up the Apache server. So before we install the Apache server, what we want to do is update the latest package index. So we can do that with the command sudo apt update. That will update the latest package index. It will ask your password to do that because sudo runs a command as administrator user. So paste your passwords, and if you press enter, you will actually be updating the package list. So apt update is the command that updates the packages, and that command needs to be run as root. So when you type the sudo in front, it runs the command as root. And you'll see you also need to be part of the sudo group. So in this case, Peter is not in the sudo group, which is why if we type groups, you'll see we're only part of the group Peter and not of the parts of the group sudo. So we cannot run system administrator commands yet. Let's go back and log in as root on the server. So log in as root again on your server, and what you want to do is to add your new user to the sudo group, because then you will be allowed to run root commands as your regular user. In order to do that, you type sudo usermod -add group sudo and then the username. So in this case, the username was Peter. So that adds the user Peter to your new user group. We can type exit. Now log in as Peter with the search. And now we should be able to run any command as sudo, so as root. So if we type sudo, for example, pwd, it will ask the password of your username. And now it outputs the command output because we run it as sudo. Because Peter, or our username, is now part of the sudo group. If I type groups, you'll see Peter is now part of the sudo group, which is why we can now run any command as root. So if we type sudo date, for example, it will run the date command as administrator. And we can do that because we are part of the sudo group. So groups shows you which groups you are part of, and sudo is a group that can run system or administrator root commands. So now let's do the actual update. So we update the package index with command sudo apt update. That will update the index. We can press yes. So that can take a while because depending on the index size. And now that the package index is updated, what you can do is install the Apache web server. So it's an application or a software running on top of your server on your system. So with the apt command you can do that. So sudo apt or apt install Apache 2. That will install the Apache web server, which allows you to run websites on the internet. So we type yes. And you'll see that installs the Apache web server. Okay, we can press OK. It asks us to restart some services. Can press tab and OK. So now we should be running a web server. We can check if it's actually running if we type the sudo command. So sudo service Apache 2 status, and it tells you if the service in this or the application, in this case Apache 2, is running. So you'll see here active running. So we know that the web server is running, which means we should be able to access the default website using the IP address. So let's try that out. So we have the IP address here. Let's copy it. And we'll try to just open it, so http:// with the IP address, and see if we get anything. And you see we don't see anything, and that's most likely because the firewall is blocking free service by default. So we will check what the firewall is doing. So we type sudo server. In this case is UFW, uncomplicated firewall status, and you'll see the firewall service is actually running here. You see active uncomplicated firewall. So that might be blocking our web server. So what we can do is type sudo UFW allow and then Apache, which is the web server. If we type sudo UFW status, we can see this allowed, and it tells us 22, so that is SSH port, and you'll see Apache here, which is allowed. So now we might be able to access the server. So if you refresh the page, you'll see the default website of Apache. So saying Ubuntu Apache default page and some general information about the web server. So it could be any web page showing now. Now we created a server which is serving an internet web page. So we are now running the computer that behind the website. So in this case we have a website and we set up the computer behind that. You can control the web server or any application running on the system, on the server, using the commands service or systemctl. So we can type sudo, for example, systemctl status Apache 2, and it will tell you it's running. Now, besides systemctl, you can also use the service command, so that will do the exact same. So sudo service status Apache 2. Okay, let's use systemctl. And we could, for example, stop the Apache server if we type stop. And if we then check the status, see it's inactive now. So now the web application or the website won't be visible, won't be loaded, because the web server, the Apache server, is offline, it's not running. To start it again, you can type start, and that will restart it. So now if we check the status, it should be telling you that it's running, and that means it's accessible on the internet again. Now, if you change the configuration of the Apache server, what you can do is type reload, and that will reload the configuration file. It's also possible just to restart it. So if you type restart, it will restart the web server. Now, this will work with any service on your, or any application on your server. So now we are using Apache 2, but it will, for example, also work for UFW or any other program. So many users will install the website in a directory called var www.html. That is the default website for your default directory for your website. So in this case, we have just HTML file, which is not a programming language, right? It's just like website files. And many programmers, they will set up some stack here, like the lamp stack, which allows them to use some programming language instead of files, which lets you define images and text and so on, but it won't let you do any programming. So many programmers, what they will do is install a language called PHP, the PHP programming language. So using the sudo command, they will type apt install and then lib apache 2 mod php and php MySQL. So many will run this command and they will install the programming language onto their web servers. So we type yes, and it will install the PHP programming language. So then, of course, the idea is that you then can run PHP websites on your server. So this will install for a moment. Press enter, tap OK, enter. So now we can type php-v, which should show the version number of the PHP file. So PHP is one of the programming languages. It's the most widely used on the web. And the PHP language can be used to create websites. So we can, for example, remove this file and instead of a .html file, we can load a .php file. And the PHP file, as the name implies, is a programming language. So we're gonna remove that file, remove index.html, and I'm gonna make a new file called index.php. So index.php, I will use Nano, but you can also use it on your own computer and upload the file using SFTP or FileZilla. Then we can type PHP code in here. So that looks like this. So this is the start of the PHP code, and this is the end of the PHP code. And with the echo command, we can output some text. And type a semicolon on the end. Now we're gonna save it. Ctrl O to save, Ctrl X to exit. And so now we should have the file here. If we type ls, we have index.php. And if we reload the website, so if we reload the website, we should see the output. So in this case, it tells us PHP programming language. And as it's a programming language, we can write some program in there which does all kind of things. So, for example, let me just change this. So you can, with the echo command, you can output all kind of things. You call a function called PHP info. So to call that function, you type info with closing and starting and closing brackets and a semicolon on the end. Now save it. And once you reload it, it will tell you all kind of information about the PHP programming language. So like the system and which server you're running. So in this case, Apache on Ubuntu. Some other information and a lot of configuration information. So all of this information you see, is output of that function PHP info. Now, of course, we can write any programming language code here. So for example, we might make a loop here, which looks like this. So it looks a bit cryptic, but what we do here is repeat this line of code, which outputs the number I and a new line 10 times. So you can get any PHP code from the internet and run it now. If we reload this, you'll see it outputs that 10 times, 0 to 9. And so any PHP code you can now execute on your web server, as long as that file has the extension .php. So that's how you would be able to run PHP code on your website or your web server. For instance, we can create a new file, example.php. We again have the start code and the end code. And now we can write some programming language code, for example, echo example PHP, maybe some variable, and then output that variable. So we can now, if we would reload this page, you'll see it just outputs this, and that is because by default, if we exit, it loads the index.php file. So to run the other codes, we type /example.php. So that is the file name of the other file, example.php. So you'll see example.php outputs example.php with the echo command, and then outputs some number here. So that's how you can run basic PHP code. Now this is not a PHP programming course, just show you how you can set up the ability to run PHP code on your web server. So your website is stored in a directory www/html. So inside this website, the directory is stored. Let me enlarge the font a bit. So this is the directory where the website will be stored, or is stored, the website you saw before. If I list the files, you'll see a file called index.html. So that is always the default website. Now, when you have a website created, what you can do is put it in the directory var www/html. If you upload it to there, it will be visible. So any website is an .html file. If you have a PHP website, you could rename it to index.php. For HTML websites, for standard websites, it's just the HTML file. So upload your files, images, and JavaScripts into the directory var www/html. In order to upload, you can use a tool called SFTP or Secure FTP. So if I type exit, and let's say I have some file here, so my own website file, I can maybe add some data to it. So let's say we have our website, which is just a line of my website. We can use a tool called SFTP to upload one or more files to our server. So we can say SFTP with your username. So let's log in as root with the IP address. And next we will need to type our password. So we paste in our password. And if we type pwd, you'll see we are inside /root. And remember that your website is in the var www.html directory. So we upload the file there, so index.html, and we type the put command, which will upload it. And you'll see now we have an index.html file, and it overwrites it. So if we were to reload our page, you'll see now we have our own website content here on the server. So with SFTP you can upload and download files. It's a really basic file transfer application. SFTP allows you to upload and download files. If you type help, you'll see there's many more commands here. So to exit SFTP you type quit, and now we are back in your own computer. You can connect to the server again with the SSH commands, so maybe as a regular user, and then type your passwords. So if you type your password, press enter, you will be again your server as in this case a regular user. So the website is stored in var www.html, and if we list with a detailed list, so ls-l, you'll see the actual owner of the website. So in this case the owner of the website is root, and not in this case a user like Peter or something else. So this is the actual website file. If I type get, you can see the contents of the file, and this is the most basic way to upload files. Keep in mind that you can also edit files on the Linux system itself using a terminal editor. However, it is more easy to use regular editor for your website and then upload those files. So you can do that through the command line. You can also do that using a tool called FileZilla. And so FileZilla is a graphical tool you can use to upload files to your server. You'll see you can download it from the internet, from filezilla-project.org. If you use Linux, you can also use your package manager to install it. So filezilla.org, you can download it and open it. So if I open it, you'll get this interface where you can type your host name, that is the internet address of your server. So copy your address, then your username. So let's log in as a regular user, and the password. So type the password, click connect, and then click OK. And that will connect to the server, at least if your firewall is not blocking the connection. And what you want to do is to connect on port 22 instead of 21. You'll see this message, so we click OK. And we get an interface where we are in /home/Peter, you'll see here. And on the left you see your system files. So what you can do is click on any file and click download. That will download from the server to your computer. So let's say I go to my desktop directory and I click on this file. You see the file is then transferred to my computer, to the desktop directory, home Frank desktop. So on the left you have your computer, and on the right you have the server. I can delete the file as well. You can also upload files. So if you have some file, let's see if I have any file, quite large files. Maybe I have some small file, user share. Okay, you can browse through your file system using this command line interface. You'll see I don't see any files in here to upload. Let's say this file, we can right click and click uploads, and it will upload to your server, in this case home Peter. You'll see the file. You can also browse your file system. So if you log in as root, you will also be able to go to the directory var www, and you can then click like upload your directory or all of your files. You can, with shift, you can select multiple. You would be able to upload all of your website files at once to your server. So it's a more easy way to upload your files using the FileZilla tool if you have a lot of files. Now there's all kind of applications you can install on your web server. For example, it might be you might install a database or a backup server, mail server for email, web server like Apache that we did, or even some kind of video game server can be run as well. So really depends on what you need. Everything you install you can do with the apt command. So sudo, which runs a command as the super user. Now in this case we are logged in as super user, but of course for security reasons you want to disable root login, because otherwise you would just need the password to take over your server. So you want to log in as a regular user. So in this case let's type Peter, then the password, and press enter. So now whatever you want to install, you can do with a sudo apt install. So for example, sudo apt install vim, that would install that on the computer. So sudo apt install. And we can install anything like a database. Some popular databases are MySQL, Postgres, and also Node.js. Also there's some others. You can make backups or install some software for backup or software for a mail server. Really depends on your needs, but using the sudo apt install you can install any software, any package on your system. If you want to search for packages you can type sudo apt search and then kind of software you're looking for. For example, we might search for Nginx, and then it searches a repository. You can scroll here for all kind of applications with that name. So in this case, you'll see here small web server, Nginx. So with the apt search command, you can search for programs. With the install command, it installs software. So let's install some software, some really useless. So we installed a program called Cause, which is really basic and doesn't do anything useful. So we can say Cause hello, I think, and you'll see that's all the program does. So it says some output given it's whatever you give as input. Now let's say we want to remove this, then we type sudo apt-get --purge remove with the program name. And once we press, or just sudo apt-get remove, and that will remove the program. If we press yes, it will be uninstalled from the server. So you can install and uninstall any kind of software with the apt or apt-get command. Now if you want to know what is running on your server, we can exit the actual server and use a tool called nmap to scan the server. So nmap scans the server for any application that might be running. It might be that nmap is not installed in your computer, then you can download it from the internet. If I type nmap, you'll see nmap.org, and you can download it for your system. For example, if I go to downloads, you'll see there's a Windows version, and also Linux version. So the tool works very simple. You type nmap with the IP address. So we're gonna copy that IP and paste it in, and you'll see it's not installed in this computer. So I'm gonna install it on my Linux computer. And type in the password for the application. And once installed, we can type nmap space the IP address. so the IP address of our server. And what this will do is it will scan our server for any applications that are running. So in this case, it's running the SSH server that we use to log in many times. And any other application you install that has something facing the internet will be listed here as well. So in this case, a web server. And every application has its unique port. So you'll see SSH is assigned to port 22 and web is assigned to port 80. And the port you can think of as a communication line. So any data for the application, Apache HTTP web server goes over line 80, and any data for communication with the SSH protocol goes over line 22. So with the nmap command you can see which applications are running that are exposed to the public internet. So in this case we have two applications that are running on the server that are exposed to the internet. Yeah, and we use both, right? So we use HTTP here. This is port 80. Actually, we can type :80 and it would be the same. Because by default, on the web, on the internet, port is 80. SSH we can use as well whenever we typed SSH with username at the IP address, we could connect. So we could do that because it's running these two applications on the computer, on the server. We connected to the server using the IP address. So we would type the IP address in the browser and that would open our web page. Now, of course, this is not how we usually surf the internet. We don't type in IP addresses. We don't type in these addresses with all those numbers and dots whenever we want to visit a website. We use domain names. So www.something.com is what we use to visit websites. So domain names. So domain names are registered on domain name servers and can be linked to IP addresses. So in this case, you run a server on the clouds. They just give you the IP address. They don't give you a domain name. However, you can register a domain name. There's many domain name providers like Cloudflare and others. And then you can link that domain name to your IP address and you will be able to visit or server using the website name, so www.something.com. For example, you can go to namecheap.com or any other internet provider where you can buy a domain name and then you can link that domain name to your IP address and you would then be able to visit your server using the actual website name, so www.something.com. So you would link the domain name that you register on a provider with your IP address, and that process is very simple, but it also takes a while. So it might be that you have to wait 24 hours or sometime, at least an hour maybe, before it actually works. So it's a slow process, but it's also very simple because you just register a domain name and then link it to your public IP address, and then your web server would be available using that address.